The number one ranked recruit in the 2026 class moved to Washington for his senior year, and now the Gonzaga Bulldogs are back in the mix.
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Welcome into the Locked On Zags podcast. I am your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton. We got a lot to cover today. Both the Gonzaga men and women have now lost a player to the transfer portal. We'll talk about that, what it means for each of those programs to close out the show. Plus, we got a tasty matchup between a pair of Hall of Fame coaches now set for the 26-27 season, another notch in Mark Few's non-conference belt for this year. We're going to get to that in the second segment, but we are leading with a nuke of a recruiting update that came out on Wednesday. The Gonzaga Bulldogs, who have long been considered out of the running for Tyran Stokes, the number one ranked recruit in the 2026 class, are now back in the mix. And that is noteworthy because Tyran Stokes, again, the number one player in the class. Gonzaga has landed the number one player in a recruiting class just once in their history. That was, of course, the great Chet Holmgren back in 2021. According to 247 Sports, Gonzaga has only landed 3 five-star players ever. That would be, of course, Chet Holmgren, as well as Jalen Suggs and Hunter Salas. There are a couple other recruiting services that have considered Zach Collins a 5-star. I think even Nolan Hickman has been considered a 5-star at a few places, but one of the top, if not the top recruiting service considers Gonzaga to have only landed 3 5-star players. So this is a big deal. This is a big deal that Gonzaga is back in the mix here for Tyran Stokes. This is reported by the website Zags blog, hosted by Adam Zagoria, who's a longtime college basketball reporter, covers the sport on a national scale. So certainly some legitimacy to this report. Stokes was just coming off the McDonald's All-American game where he played and was arguably the best player on the floor, even though he was rocking long, baggy white undershirt, which looked incredibly goofy. But as somebody who always wore a t-shirt under my jersey, I relate. I get it. I feel you, Tyran. I'm all on board with wearing the long sleeves underneath the jersey look. Stokes is a player who is currently playing at Rainier Beach High School in Seattle, Washington, and that is a big part of this conversation. He had previously been playing at Notre Dame High School in Sherman Oaks, California. That name sounds familiar. That is the high school that Dusty Stromer played at for his high school career. Of course, Gonzaga pursued him, watched him very closely out there, potentially got some looks at Tyran Stokes at that time as well. And then Stokes, coming into his senior year, decided to transfer, goes up to Seattle to play for Coach Jamal Crawford. It's a program that has produced many NBA players. I know that Nate Robinson went there, Crawford, a handful of others as well. A very good basketball school. Obviously, it is a public school. And it is not, one of these basketball factories, the way that like a Compass Prep, where Davis Vogel spent his senior year, or, there's tons of these, there's obviously the OTE academies, Montverde Prep in Florida. Like there's tons of programs like that. Typically, that's where you see the very top tier players spending at least their senior year, if not a couple of years of their high school career. And so for Stokes to be playing at a public school is noteworthy. It's noteworthy that it's in Washington, of course, because Gonzaga is now a lot closer proximity-wise to Tyran Stokes. Some have criticized the decision because he's not competing against super high-level competition. I mean, he's just competing in the Seattle public school district, against those teams. And you can watch some of his high school film this year at Rainier Beach, and he's bigger, stronger, faster than everybody he's competing against. And had he been playing at, one of those basketball factory schools, or even still at Notre Dame or something like that, he'd be facing better competition. But Stokes has played extremely well when he has faced high-level competition in the EYBL circuit, other summer circuits. Like, there's not really any debate that he is like sandbagging his performance and that it's only valid because of that. Like, he's the best player in the class. And that is really unquestionably true. It is not considered a particularly strong overall class, but he's still the very, very best. And there's plenty of other great players. Jason Crow, Bruce Branch come to mind, a few others as well. So for Stokes, for Gonzaga, I should say, it has long been a race between Kansas, Kentucky, and Oregon. Gonzaga was pursuing him initially. This is not the first time they have been connected to Stokes. They were in the mix. They were trying to get him on campus for a visit. It fell through. Eventually in October, he announced his top 3 was Kansas, Kentucky, and Oregon. So at the time, it felt like Gonzaga's kind of pursuit of Stokes was done, or that it was going to not be particularly fruitful going forward. It was shortly after that he made the move to Rainier Beach. And then this report from Zagoria that came out on Wednesday indicated that both Gonzaga and Washington have made a, quote, late charge in the pursuit of Tyran Stokes. So what exactly that means remains fairly vague. Does that mean that they have stayed in the mix and that Stokes has reopened his recruitment a little bit? Does it mean that they, come up with more money? Does it mean that they're now back in front? Like, what exactly does it all mean is a little bit hard to know. It's worth pointing out, Kansas has remained the top option here for a while, at least according to the predictions. Trying to predict what high schoolers do is always a little bit of a fruitless endeavor. So you take that with a grain of salt, not because these companies are bad at their jobs, but because, again, trying to predict what a high schooler is going to do in an environment where there's people constantly changing their evaluations of you, changing their roster, changing their coaches, changing their amount of money they're offering you. Yeah, it's a complete crapshoot trying to guess what's going to happen here. But one of the reasons that Kentucky felt optimistic that maybe Stokes would end up there, or that Oregon, or that Arkansas, who also has kind of been considered in the mix here, or Gonzaga and Washington, is that Bill Self, the longtime head coach of the Kansas Jayhawks, was considering retiring. And on Wednesday, he confirmed he's not retiring. He's back. He never left, but he's back in some ways for Kansas for the 26-27 season. Stokes posted about that on social media, which feels significant. Again, as Kansas was already the front runner in the clubhouse for Tyran Stokes, now having Bill Self confirm he's coming back, the coach has been recruiting this whole time, having to come off the back of having the number one recruit in the class, the previous class in Darren Peterson, that feels like a good sign for Stokes, even though the Darren Peterson season didn't go great. I mean, he performed very well, but he was in and out of the lineup with injury stuff. Kansas got eliminated in the round of 32. Like, I can see why maybe that would be a bit of a deterring factor, but I would still imagine that Kansas is the leader right now and that has not changed. But it's notable that Gonzaga gets mentioned by name as being in the mix here. Stokes, in terms of who he is, he's a 6'7", 230-pound behemoth. This dude is huge. He's bigger, faster, more physically strong than everybody he's facing, and that's not just because of his competition level. That is true in the McDonald's All-American game. That is true in the EYBL circuit. He is a really, really big, physically mature player for his age, but he also has guard skills. We're talking about a 6'7" wing who weighs 230, which is really big, who has a 7-foot wingspan and plays like a guard. He's going to be an absolute wrecking ball at the collegiate level. He gets out in transition as well as anybody. He's great at getting downhill, at scoring at the rim. He's got a lot of kind of shiftiness and craftiness to his game, can see driving lanes that other people would not imagine are there, can get to the cup relentlessly. He's going to get fouled a ton. He's like a bigger, even, I don't know if more athletic, but bigger, more physical version of Tyran Grant Foster at 18. Like, that is what we're talking about here. Also, he shoots better from three, which was a notable knock on Tyran Grant Foster. So Tyran Stokes is a better three-point shooting, younger, more physically imposing kind of version of Grant Foster in a lot of ways. He's also a kind of doesn't get enough credit for how good of a facilitator he is. He's got good court vision. He makes good passes. Again, part of the downside of playing with teammates who maybe aren't on your level is that your assist numbers and your turnover numbers maybe don't reflect how good of a passer you actually are, because your teammates are bobbling the ball or they're not hitting shots or whatever it may be. And again, he's not considered an elite shooter, but he shot 36%, and that number stayed pretty consistent even when playing against higher level competition. So it's not like you can say he's a bad shooter. It's just not a skill that has caught up with the rest of his offensive profile. Now, defense is where the skill competition level does matter to some extent here, because he looks like a good defender. He puts up good defensive numbers, but there is some of the scouts are like, well, we'll kind of see what that looks like. If the effort is there, a player who's that big, who's that strong, who has that big of a wingspan, there's no real reason they wouldn't be a good defensive player, but we can't say definitively that is the case. So there's going to be some question about that. Like, if we're going to keep using the Grant Foster comparison, he is not Grant Foster on the defensive end of the floor. Like that's just not a player that he is right now. He might develop into that eventually, but he's going to be a one and done. So the odds of that development happening in a significant way in 1 year in college are probably fairly limited. But if you're talking about fit at Gonzaga, I know people are concerned, like there's some character concerns because he left his school kind of abruptly to go to Rainier Beach. I will let the coaching staff and other people kind of determine that. I'm not going to pretend to know enough about him as a character. I don't see any obvious red flags. If that's the strongest thing people have against him, that doesn't really bother me all that much. Like, again, without knowing the full scope of the conversation, it's worth looking into. Let's not pretend it's nothing, but it might not be that significant, especially when consider the talent level here. You had a kid like Stokes alongside Davis Fogel, alongside Braden Huff, Mario Saint-Superi. Obviously, you have Inocente to help kind of clean up some of that stuff defensively. I mean, this team would be really, really dynamic offensively. I don't know how realistic it is. Like I said, Kansas is probably the front runner here. If money is like the most important or very high on the list, Gonzaga is probably not going to get it done. I don't know that Gonzaga wants to spend a huge chunk, like 30+% of their budget on one player. I would imagine they probably do not want to do that. You could slide Stokes up to the 4 and play him at a point forward spot, but he also plays kind of a similar role to Davis Fogel. They're different enough that I think the pairing works well together, but they're similar enough that a wing is not the biggest priority for Gonzaga. Their biggest priority is a shooting guard and a center or a rim protector. Stokes is not either of those things. But while I think if you can get him, you gotta go, you gotta pursue him, you gotta try. I think eventually there reaches a threshold where you say, hey, we can't go over, X million dollars, whatever it may be. And if that is, if Kansas is doubling that or Kentucky is doubling that, which is not outside the realm of possibility, I think that probably puts Gonzaga on the wrong side of landing him here. But it's notable that they're part of the conversation. It's significant for people who felt like Gonzaga has pivoted to transfers only, is not going after high schoolers. They already have a top 15 ranked recruiting class in 2026 with Luka Foster, guard Jack Cahill from Germany, and Sam Funches. So they're already bringing in 3 freshmen. They're pursuing the best freshmen in the class. It is very clear that this team still cares a lot about going after kids out of high school. And I think that's a good thing for this program and the health of the program going forward, even if Stokes doesn't end up being a Gonzaga Bulldog. Well, we know Gonzaga is going to play Purdue next season. We have rumors about a couple other Big Ten schools, and now another one joins the list. Can Mark Few get to 500 against his buddy Tom Izzo and Michigan State? We got a pair of Hall of Famers squaring off next year. We'll talk about what was said about this game, what we know so far, all that coming up here in just a second. But first, today's episode is brought to you by TurboTax. It is tax time, and for a lot of us, the old way of doing taxes is kind of a lot. There's trying to book an appointment that's not always the most convenient, sitting in a waiting room with a stack of papers and emailing back and forth and wondering if they really get your unique situation. But this year, you are getting a major upgrade. Intuit TurboTax now has in-person locations nationwide. You can meet face-to-face with a real tax expert, and your documents get uploaded straight to your TurboTax app right on the spot. And just like that, you're done. Your TurboTax expert works to get you every dollar you deserve while you get a real-time notifications as you go about your day. It's the relief of walking in and meeting a real person and walking out knowing your taxes are being handled correctly. So head to TurboTax.com/local to find a store near you and book your appointment. All right, folks, segment 2, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags, still part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the #1 sports podcasting network. And folks, if you've been thinking about joining the Everydayer Club, now is the time to do so. You'll get ad-free versions of the show. You also get access to our group chat on Discord. And right now, I know it's April, but you can still use promo code MARCH, and you'll get your first month completely free. Head to lockedonzags.supercast.com or tap the link in the show notes to learn more. Well, folks, we got scheduling update on Tuesday night, I should say, is when it first came out. And we got it from, I was going to say an unlikely source. It's not an unlikely source. It's just not the source that you would expect that to come from, because it was straight from the coach's mouth. Not Mark Few, but Tom Izzo, the longtime head coach of the Michigan State Spartans, a longtime friend of Coach Few's as well. And Izzo was speaking on an East Lansing radio show. Stout on Sports is the name. And as part of that conversation, talking kind of just broadly about scheduling as a kind of concept for him and scheduling for this upcoming season, Izzo dropped a little nugget for us all. I'm going to read the direct quote, the full kind of 2-sentence quote here, because this is everything that was said about this game against Gonzaga. Quote, UConn is coming back to play an exhibition game, and I think we've got Duke in Chicago. We've got Gonzaga in California. The one thing I've still stayed stupid on is my scheduling. I'm always trying to bring good teams here. So that is what we know. Tom Izzo has said they're going to play Gonzaga in California next season, this upcoming season. What we do not have is confirmation from either school. What we do not have is a date for the game or a time for the game. We also don't have a location. It turns out California is huge. There are a lot of places in California that a game between Gonzaga and Michigan State could end up being played. I enjoy greatly that is the extent of what we know at this point. It is not uncommon for games to be announced either by John Rothstein, who typically is the one who announces them because he is an incredibly hardworking man. Even in the offseason, he likes to joke he sleeps in May, but he doesn't. He's still working hard, getting all that scheduling and transfer portal and various other updates out there. So typically that's where it comes from. Releases from schools are often 6 weeks to 2 months after a game is announced. Like, it was a surprise that we found out about Gonzaga versus Purdue, and then it was only like a few weeks later that was officially announced by the school. For reference, we found out in December via John Rothstein, about an hour before Gonzaga and UCLA tipped off in Seattle, at the battle in Seattle, that they were renewing their series to play 2 more years on neutral sites. That was in December. We still have not had official confirmation from either school. So that game is still kind of, for lack of a better word, TBD. I trust that Rothstein is right about this. I don't know why these two schools would not continue to play each other. I assume that the reason we haven't got a release is because they're still figuring out when and where that game is going to be played. That is also true of this Michigan State game. Maybe they have an idea of where, they're just working out dates. In terms of where this game is likely going to happen, the Chase Center in San Francisco feels like a pretty obvious candidate. Gonzaga leaving the WCC means they won't have that game against San Francisco. They also won't have road games in Santa Clara and St. Mary's. And while Fresno State is technically in Northern California, it is not particularly close to either of those places. So it makes sense to me to play at the Chase Center to give the Bay Area Gonzaga fans who have been used to being able to see this team 1, 2, 3 different times every year, an opportunity to see them this year because there won't be others. This game could also be at the Intuit Dome. Gonzaga has played there now a couple of times, played there against UCLA 2 years ago, and that makes sense. The Clippers' home arena. I could see that game absolutely happening there. Maybe the former Staples Center, I think it's crypto.com arena now, where the Lakers play, could be there. I feel like it's probably one of those 3. Anything else would be smaller than that, or would be a school. Like, they're not going to go play at the Viejas Arena where San Diego State plays. That doesn't really make any sense. So I'm guessing it's going to be one of those 3 for a matchup of this magnitude. But yeah, it might be a while till we hear any more on that. This is one of potentially 4 matchups Gonzaga will have against the Big Ten next year. Again, Purdue is a game that is happening November 2nd against Purdue at the T-Mobile Arena in Las Vegas, the opening tip-off of the season, part of the Hall of Fame series against the Boilers. UCLA, again, we already talked about that one. Oregon is the other one. Apparently, there's going to be a return game after Gonzaga and Oregon played in Portland this year. That return game will be in Seattle this upcoming season or the year after that. That is why that game is kind of even more of a mystery than the other ones, because they haven't. What's written in the contract apparently is that Gonzaga will play Oregon in Seattle in either 26-27 or 27-28. So really might be a while, might not ever get confirmation that that game is happening or not. So we'll keep an eye on that situation. But with those games, whether Oregon happens or not, you have Michigan State, you have Purdue, you likely have UCLA, you have road games against Kentucky and Creighton, which are both scheduled for this upcoming season. The Creighton will be the return of a home and home that started last year. Kentucky will be the 5th of a 6-year series that started when John Calipari was the head coach. This will be at Rupp Arena next year. 27-28 will be when Gonzaga finally hosts the Wildcats at the McCarthy Athletic Center. So lots of great stuff on the schedule already. As a reminder, Gonzaga's moved to the new look Pac-12. The Pac-12 is going to almost certainly have 16 conference games. There's 9 teams in the league. You play all other 8 teams twice, once at home, once on the road. That's 16 games. Very, very easy, very balanced schedule that we're likely going to get from Gonzaga in the Pac-12. The rules in college basketball have expanded from 31 to 32 regular season games. So Gonzaga will have 16 non-conference games. If you assume all of these games are happening, including the Oregon game, That means, and you obviously have 3 games in the Players Era Festival. Don't want to forget that as well. That means 7 of your non-conference games are already accounted for. There's still 9 to play with. You got 4 to 5 bye games that are in there, and then a bunch of schools that, we've kind of expected or thought or maybe anticipate Gonzaga playing. Maybe the Washington series gets started again. Maybe Baylor gets back on the schedule. Maybe Gonzaga plays Randy Bennett at Arizona State. That would be an interesting one. Would love to see BYU back on the schedule. And then maybe some WCC foes. Do they play San Francisco? Do they play Santa Clara? Do they now play a Randy Bennett-less St. Mary's team? Going to be interesting to see if any of those games end up happening for Gonzaga this year. Still a long ways to go until that schedule is even close to finalized for Mark Few and the Bulldogs, but it is off to a phenomenal start so far with Purdue, Michigan State, Kentucky, Creighton, UCLA, 3 games in the Players Era Festival, and potentially the Oregon Ducks as well. In terms of Gonzaga's history against Michigan State, in the Mark Few era, Gonzaga has won 2 games and lost 3 games to the Spartans. So they're looking to get back up to 500 against Michigan State if they are able to win this game that happens this upcoming season. The last time these 2 teams played was in 2022. You probably remember this game because it was on the USS Abraham Lincoln, playing on an aircraft carrier as part of the Armed Forces Classic. Because this game was played on an aircraft carrier, the 3-point shooting was a nightmare. It was just a mess of a game. They typically are in this environment. Gonzaga did win, however, 64-63 behind 22 points from Drew Timme. Gonzaga's other win against Michigan State is one of the most epic games in program history, also one of the most epic games in the history of the Maui Invitational. This was a semifinal game back in 2005. Gonzaga won this game in triple overtime thanks to 43 points from legend Adam Morrison. Again, truly one of the best games in the history of the Maui Invitational. Gonzaga went on to the championship where they lost to UConn. Those are Gonzaga's 2 wins. Their 3 losses. One was them in East Lansing in 2009. The return game was in Spokane in 2011. Gonzaga lost that game. I was in the house for that game, sitting really close and watching a then I don't want to say unknown, but not super well-known Draymond Green absolutely carve up the Zags. I think he hung 35 on them at the Kennel. That was a tough one to watch. Gonzaga dropped that game at home. They don't lose at home very often. So those are the 2 regular season losses. They also played Michigan State. The first time Mark Few faced them as a head coach was in 2001, the only matchup between these 2 schools in the NCAA tournament. Gonzaga was a 12 seed. In 2001, they had advanced far enough to face number 1 Michigan State. Michigan State rolled to a 77-62 victory en route to the Final Four, where they lost to Arizona, who went to the national championship game and then lost to Duke. So a lot of history against Gonzaga, or between Michigan State and Gonzaga. Will be nice to have this back on the schedule. 2 Hall of Fame coaches squaring off against each other. You love to see it. This is going to be a fun game whenever we find out when and, of course, where this game ends up taking place. Well, folks, Gonzaga had their first departure via the transfer portal in walk-on Cade Orness. We're going to talk about why it happened and what it means for the Zags going forward. All that coming up here in just a second. But first, folks, what if sports were traded like markets? Now you can put your sports IQ to work in real time with Robinhood Prediction Markets. It's not you against the house. It's you participating in a live market. You can buy or sell your positions live all game long. Use your sports knowledge in the moments that matter the most. Robinhood Prediction Markets, it changes the game. It's people who move the action. So when momentum shifts, you can move with it. I always knew the game, but I never had a dynamic way to apply that knowledge. And now it's available across the U.S. Download the Robinhood app now to begin. Folks, futures and cleared swaps trading involves significant risk and is not appropriate for everyone. Event contracts are offered by Robinhood Derivatives, LLC, a registered futures commission merchant and swap firm. Today's episode is also brought to you by FanDuel. The Final Four is here. We are a couple days away from finding out which 2 teams are going to compete for the national championship. It's one of the best times of the year. Your brackets are probably already busted, but you've seen plenty of buzzer beaters, plenty of upsets, and it's nonstop action on Saturday all the way through till one shining moment on Monday evening. And right now, FanDuel is giving new customers a way to stay in that action. Here's the best part. You get up to $300 back in bonus bets every day for 10 days. That means you have 10 chances to stay involved throughout all of the rest of the NCAA tournament and going into the offseason. You can mix it up however you want. You can make game picks. You can bet on futures. You can even make same game parlays for bigger potential payouts. It's perfect for the tournament because every day there's something new. There's different matchups, there's new storylines, and more ways to get involved. Right now, we got odds for those two Final Four games. Illinois, 2.5-point favorites over UConn, while Michigan is 1.5-point favorites over Arizona. So, folks, visit FanDuel.com to sign up today. That's FanDuel.com to get in on all the action. All right, folks, closing out the show. Moving on, we talked about scheduling. We talked about recruiting. We're now talking about transfers. Kind of the three biggest storylines. I joke that the three biggest storylines that typically happen in the offseason are recruiting news, which we talked about with Tyran Stokes, scheduling updates, which we talked about with Michigan State, transfer portal updates, which we're about to talk about, and then it's some combination of pro Zags, NBA Zags, and or off the court stuff, which we're not going to talk about on the show, but we will mention briefly. Brandon Clark, by the way, got arrested, former Gonzaga Bulldog forward and now Memphis Grizzlies forward. I don't know a ton of details as we're recording right now. It sounds like there's still details to come, so maybe we'll get to that in an NBA Zag update next week. But yeah, Wednesday was a busy day with all four of the main offseason topics happening or updates happening across all four of those disciplines within the last 24 hours. But we're going to talk about transfers here. Gonzaga guard Cade Orness has announced his intention to enter the transfer portal. And that verbiage is key right now. The transfer portal window opens on April 7th. 2 years ago, the portal window opened like the day after Selection Sunday, which was an absolute nightmare. They decided, hey, that was not good. 64 teams plus all the NIT teams, every other team still competing. We should probably not open it at that time. So they bumped it from being a 45-day window starting the day after Selection Sunday to a 30-day window starting the day after the Sweet 16 matchups, or the day after we got to the Sweet 16. That was better. But they have now changed it even more, and now the portal window will open officially on Tuesday, April 7th, again, the day after the national championship, less than a week from now. And while that is a good change, and I think important because you cannot contact transfers right now. Obviously, there's always tampering and always things happening. We're not going to pretend that it's not. That would be silly to do so. But it takes the pressure off of the coaches that are still competing of like, we can't really do anything like above board anyway. So we're just going to kind of focus on what we're doing and kind of see what happens there. But what has happened over the last couple of weeks is that hundreds of players have announced their intention to enter the transfer portal. For all intents and purposes, it's the same thing. Maybe a handful of these players will have said publicly, penned a goodbye to their old school, had it reported by their agent that they're entering the portal, and then they'll change their mind and won't actually put their name in the portal. I guess that's less than 1/3% of the players who have announced ahead of time, which at this point is over 800 players have reported they're planning to enter the transfer portal. And there's still 5 days to go until the portal window officially opens. Having said all of that, that is why Cade Orness has set an intention to enter the transfer portal, but has not officially done so, although I don't expect there to be any change in this situation. Orness is a 6'3" guard from Poulsbo, Washington. He has 3 years of eligibility remaining because he redshirted his first year in Spokane. He played at North Kitsap High School, was a really good high school player, actually eliminated Davis Fogel when he was at Anacortes High School from the state 2A champion or playoffs. He scored 24 points in that game to help knock out Anacortes. Fogel had 33 of Anacortes' 57 points in that game, mind you. That is the player that he has always been. But Orness ended up joining Gonzaga as a preferred walk-on for the 24-25 season. And like walk-ons almost always do at Gonzaga, Orness redshirted his first year. So he did not play in any games in the 24-25 season. But this year, he did end up appearing in 8 games. He made his debut in Gonzaga's season-opening win over Texas Southern, which was by a measly 55 points. That was his debut. He scored his lone bucket, his lone field goal 2 weeks later against Southern Utah. That was the game Gonzaga won by 72 points in that one. He ultimately finished his season and his Gonzaga career appearing in 8 games for the Zags this past year, playing 20 total minutes. He scored 3 points, had 1 rebound, 1 assist, and a steal, went 1 of 2 from the field, 1 of 5 from the free throw line. I am curious what will happen to Cade Orness, where he will end up out of the transfer portal. Because the last 2 players that have transferred from Gonzaga who were walk-ons were Colby Brooks, who spent 2 years or maybe 3 years at Gonzaga and then transferred and landed at San Diego. And he played for San Diego. He played like 8 minutes a game, but he started a couple of games. Like he was a part of Steve Lavin's rotation in his lone season at San Diego. He then entered the transfer portal again and ended up not playing college basketball after that, but he transferred to another WCC school and was part of their rotation. The other player was Gunaydin Lemke. Gunaydin Lemke was a bit of an interesting case. He dealt with injuries in high school, so he maybe would have been probably would have been pursued by other D1 programs had he not been hurt at the time. But Gonzaga brought him in as a preferred walk-on. He's a 6'11" big man from Las Vegas. He reportedly put on 35 or 40 pounds of muscle in his 1 year as a redshirt at Gonzaga, and then transferred to Belmont, a team that won 20 games last year in the Missouri Valley Conference. So the last two walk-ons to transfer from Gonzaga landed not only at Division I programs, but at D1 programs in good conferences. San Diego is obviously not a great team, but that's a school in the WCC, and Belmont is a very good team in the Missouri Valley Conference. So I'll be interested to see if Orness can find his way to another program like that. Does he stay local and go to Seattle U, closer to home? Does he go to like a Big West school or a Big Sky school? Does he, it's also possible he drops down to D2 or D3 and chooses to play there. Like, there's lots of things that could happen here, but I will definitely be interested to see where he does end up. I also want to point out a rule change that affected college basketball that very likely impacted this decision. The House settlement came down about a year ago. It was like summer of 2025. And most of the storylines around the House settlement were around the idea that this means that this means that teams can now directly pay players. That was the big, huge thing that happened. The $20 million budget for schools, having to go through the NIL clearinghouse for if you want to spend more than that, various other things around the House settlement that came into play. But one of the rulings, and actually one of the rulings that held up the settlement from being reached for a couple of months, was roster limits. There's not really a such thing as walk-ons anymore. Every player who is on your roster is on scholarship. That has changed. But there are also limits to how many players you can have on your team. It is now capped for men's basketball at 15. Gonzaga usually has about 16 or 17 players on their roster. And 3, 4, 5 of them are walk-ons. They don't travel with the team very often, but they usually have more than 15 on the roster. This past year, Gonzaga had 16 players on the roster. They were allowed to do that because you were grandfathered in. If you were previously a walk-on like Orness was, they are not just saying now you have to get down to 15, so you got to cut a dude in July. Like, that would have been pretty, way against the interests of student athlete welfare. So they said, we're going to grandfather this in for an extra year. But after this season, which was 25-26, you now have to be down to 15 players on your roster. So Gonzaga was going to need to get down to 15. Obviously, they have 5 players leaving the program as out of eligibility in Graham Ike and Adam Miller and Tyran Grant Foster and Jalen Worley and Noah Holland. So they were already down below that threshold. But I had a feeling that one of, if not two of the walk-ons on last year's roster, which would be Cade Orness, Alonzo Metz, who redshirted last year as a walk-on player from Jesuit High School in Oregon, and then Joaquin Reyes Moore, were going to be off the roster this offseason. Now the first domino in that group has fallen in Cade Orness. So we will see again. Gonzaga is still way below 15 at this point, but I'm curious if they're going to try to fill every one of those spots with rotation caliber players, if they're going to go get some more redshirt options, if they're going to get more walk-on type players, how exactly the roster is going to shake out. But it makes sense that a player like Orness might see the writing on the wall and opt to find a new home this offseason instead of kind of waiting to see if he's going to be able to kind of stick on the roster. Those are possible conversations happen with the staff of saying, hey, we don't know, if your spot's going to be secure, blah, blah, blah. And so that decision was kind of made for him. I don't know that that's the case necessarily. It's just something that could be a possibility here. Also want to mention here that Vera Gunaydin has entered the transfer portal on the women's basketball side, 5'9" guard from Ankara, Turkey. She's a junior college transfer who played for Gonzaga in the 24-25 season. She appeared in 17 games for the Zags, played about 4 minutes per game. And then this past year, she redshirted. So was not a part of the team last year that made the NCAA tournament that got that 12 seed, but somebody that had the eligibility to return and play a part for next season and has decided to do that or look for a new home elsewhere rather than doing that in Spokane with the Zags. I'll be curious if this is the only transfer portal addition for Gonzaga. The only player leaving the program outside of Gunaydin is Inesh Betancourt, who was a senior on this team who was out of eligibility. That's it. Most of this team is sophomores and freshmen, or freshmen and sophomores from last year. So rising juniors and sophomores. They have some seniors on the roster as well, but this is a really young team. And if Coach Fortier can keep this group together, can keep Allie Turner and Lauren Whitaker and Jaden Hale and Taryn Gardner and everybody else kind of together going into next year, they could be really, really good in the new look Pac-12. So we'll certainly be keeping an eye on that and how that shakes out for them as the portal season starts in earnest next week. Folks, that's going to wrap it up for me today here on the Locked On Zags podcast. Thank you so much. For those of you who made the show your first listen or watch of the day, of course, a special shout out to those everyday listeners as well. Be back with one more show on Friday, and then next week we will get even more fully into the transfer portal season as the window officially opens on Tuesday. Thanks again, folks. Have a fantastic rest of your day. And of course, as always, go Zags.